The air in the Ritz Paris that August night was too still, too rehearsed, like a stage awaiting its tragedy. Behind the shimmer of flashbulbs and laughter, whispers slithered through corridors, whispers of escape, of love, of those who would rather she remain a ghost than a woman reborn. Diana's bodyguard stood apart, his instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. Something was off. The route had changed last minute. The driver insisted on speed, and an unmarked motorcycle had circled the hotel twice. In that fleeting stillness before motion, he saw it, not a premonition, but a dreadful certainty. This wasn't just another night of evasion. It was a dance, choreographed by unseen hands. And as the princess smiled one last time, he felt the kind of silence that only precedes catastrophe. The Mercedes glided into the Paris night like a whisper fleeing from truth. Inside, conversation was sparse, fragments of fatigue, of longing, of promises whispered against a ticking clock. The driver pressed harder on the accelerator, muttering about pursuit. In the mirror, the bodyguard saw the swarm. Scooters, cars, shadows, predators chasing a dream. He reached for his radio, static, answering instead of a voice. Then, just beneath the hum of the engine, he caught it. A low hum, mechanical and constant. The motorcycle again. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet protocol demanded silence. He looked at Diana through the glass. Her smile was faint, wistful. She believed the worst had passed. He knew it had only begun. The streets narrowed, twisting like veins beneath the city's stone heart. The bodyguard's gaze darted between mirrors. Flashes, headlights, pursuit. The radio crackled again, then silence. Ahead, the Pont de l'Alma tunnel loomed, an underpass most Parisians forgot, yet history would never forget again. Dodi leaned toward the driver, his tone sharp, urgent. Henri nodded, accelerating. Diana's hand gripped the edge of her seat, instinct warning louder than words. In that suspended heartbeat before descent, the bodyguard reached across the console. He wanted to tell her to fasten her seatbelt. To tell her he felt it coming. But the words died in his throat, swallowed by the roar of the engine and fate. The car plunged into darkness. Light fractured, a strobe of speed and fear. The bodyguard's heart slammed against his ribs as metal screamed against stone. Time fractured. A second stretched into eternity. The sound was not one crash, but a symphony of ruin. Steel folding, glass shattering, breath leaving bodies. When silence finally fell, it was cruel, absolute. Trevor Rhys-Jones blinked through blood and smoke, his body pinned but his mind still awake. Diana's voice came faintly, not words, but a sound, fragile and human. And in that echo he knew the truth. No one would leave this place unchanged. Not her, not him, not the world. Sirens pierced the night. Blue light painted the walls of the tunnel as rescuers descended upon history's most guarded secret. Cameras were already waiting. Flashbulbs captured not salvation but spectacle. The bodyguard's world faded in and out. Oxygen masks, commands in French, the scent of burning metal. Somewhere behind him, Diana was lifted out, her pulse faint, her name murmured like a prayer. He tried to speak, to warn them. The words refused to come. For the first time, Trevor Rhys-Jones understood helplessness, not as fear, but as the cruel awareness of fate fulfilled. Outside, the city buzzed, unaware that a new conspiracy had just been born in its veins. Paris awoke to sirens and silence. The crash was no longer a tragedy. It was an event, dissected by headlines before dawn. At the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital, corridors hummed with officials whispering orders no one dared record. Trevor Rhys-Jones drifted between morphine and memory, fragments of light and sound trapped in his skull. The press called it an accident, but the bodyguard's fractured recollection told a different story. Of headlights that weren't supposed to be there, of a car that swerved with intent, and of men who arrived before help was ever called. Outside, the palace remained mute. Inside, Something far older than grief stirred: preservation. Because grief fades, power does not. The official reports arrived within hours, written faster than truth could breathe. The driver was intoxicated, they claimed. The pursuit was to blame, they repeated. But Trevor, lying beneath hospital lights, whispered fragments that didn't fit. Motorcycles without plates, men with cameras that never took pictures, and a light that blinded the driver just before impact. A nurse leaned close, urging him to rest. Yet rest would not come. Somewhere between his pain and the pulse of monitors, a shadow passed his doorway. A man in a suit. No badge, no name. Their eyes met for an instant. And in that instant, Trevor realized the story had already been written. Without him. Across the channel, the palace issued its first statement. Restrained, immaculate, void of humanity. Behind its gilded gates, advisors convened around a table that smelled of old wood and cold tea. Every word was calibrated. Every pause political. The Queen's eyes lingered on the page before her, unmoving. There were things even monarchs could not say aloud. Outside, courtiers whispered of intercepted calls, of a ring that had vanished, of the bodyguard who might remember too much. The machine of monarchy had begun to hum, not in mourning, but in motion. It was not the truth they feared, but who might find it. Detective Martin Devereaux stood beneath the Alma underpass, her notebook trembling slightly. The scene had been scrubbed clean too quickly. No debris, no tire marks, no trace of the cameras that had been everywhere hours before. A French officer muttered that the British wanted control of the narrative. She stared at the tunnel wall, the concrete scarred by impact, and felt the chill of something carefully erased. When she requested the CCTV footage from the nearby traffic post, she was told the cameras had been malfunctioning. 4 at once. In the heart of Paris, Martine exhaled slowly, realizing she had stepped into a story where truth was already buried beneath protocol. In London, journalists hunted for leaks, chasing whispers that flickered and vanished like ghosts. A BBC correspondent received an anonymous envelope. Photographs from that night, taken seconds before impact. One frame showed a flash of light behind the Mercedes, unnatural and blinding. Another, a reflection of a second car. When he tried to trace the source, the sender's address led to an abandoned post office in Dover. The story, it seemed, was everywhere and nowhere. And as the presses rolled with sanitized truth, one name kept resurfacing in every whisper, every call, every late-night report. Trevor Rees-Jones, the man who shouldn't have survived. Behind the polished doors of the palace, grief had become strategy. Advisors whispered in circles. Each word weighed like currency. The Queen sat still, her gaze unreadable, as the Lord Chamberlain spoke of optics and stability. Across the table, Prince Charles stared into his clasped hands, the silence around him too deliberate. A single photograph of Diana lay between them, a symbol of what the world adored and what the crown could not control. The question was no longer what had happened, but what must never be revealed. Outside, bells tolled for the nation's sorrow. Inside, decisions were carved in quiet. A monarchy mourning publicly, maneuvering privately. At MI6 headquarters, a classified meeting unfolded beneath layers of security clearance. 2 analysts reviewed intercepted radio chatter from that Paris night, static, engine noise, then a faint voice in English saying, "Target entering tunnel." The tape was time-stamped, 15 minutes before the crash was reported. Their supervisor ordered it, archived under foreign intelligence, sealed indefinitely. As the room emptied, one of the analysts hesitated, pressing stop on the recorder. He stared at the waveform on the monitor, its jagged peaks like a heartbeat. He knew what I'd just heard wasn't an accident. It was a directive. In Kensington Palace, a young aide named Emily Westwood opened a sealed diplomatic pouch addressed to the private secretary. Inside lay a memo stamped "Eyes Only," a summary of covert communications between French and British security. The final line made her pulse falter. Containment measures approved. Witness under observation. She looked around the empty office, the ticking clock suddenly thunderous. Outside, mourners gathered with flowers and candles, believing grief was uniting them. Emily realized the truth was isolating her instead, and if she breathed a word, she would vanish from this world as easily as Diana had. Back in Paris, Detective Devereaux felt the case slipping from her hands. Her superiors now cited diplomatic sensitivity whenever she requested evidence. The crash site had been sterilized, the car shipped to England, the reports rewritten. She sat alone in her flat that night, the city outside muffled by rain. A single file lay on her table, photographs she had secretly kept. Among them a frame of the tunnel wall. When enhanced, it revealed faint marks of a secondary impact. Another vehicle. Metallic gray. She knew what that meant. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to say it. At a London club reserved for the discreetly powerful, two men met in shadow. One, a senior aide to the Prime Minister. The other, a former intelligence liaison. Over whiskey and low voices, they spoke of balance, of what must remain hidden to preserve the realm. She became too beloved, one murmured. And that kind of devotion can topple thrones, the other nodded, eyes cold. Then we agree. History must remember her as a tragedy, not a threat. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that within that conversation, the truth had been exiled. Forever. Weeks passed, but time had not softened the edges of that night. It had only buried them beneath politics and grief. In a quiet hospital room, guarded by silence, Trevor Rhys-Jones began to remember. Not everything, but enough. The light, the second car, the command to leave the Ritz sooner than planned. A journalist had requested an interview, but before she could reach him, hospital administrators announced his transfer to a secure facility. Trevor looked out the window at the gray Paris morning and felt the walls close in. His survival was no miracle. It was containment. Detective Devereaux returned to her office to find her desk cleared, files gone, computer reformatted, her badge suspended. Her chief muttered something about orders from above. As she walked out with nothing but her coat and conscience, a stranger slipped her a brown envelope. Inside were photographs she had never seen. Aerial images of the tunnel taken moments after the crash, time-stamped before first responders arrived. She felt the chill of invisible eyes upon her. They hadn't erased her from the investigation. They were watching to see what she'd do next. In London, journalist Peter Langley reviewed his hidden files. Each source had either vanished or recanted. One night, an email arrived, no sender, no signature, containing an audio clip. It was a radio call in English. Target entering tunnel, the same phrase. My 6 analysts had sealed. Peter froze. Someone inside wanted the truth out, but not in the open. He played the clip again and noticed a faint echo before the phrase, a metallic reverberation, as if spoken near an engine. The car, the other vehicle. He realized this wasn't conspiracy, it was coordination. Emily Westwood had not slept in days. The secret memo she'd read haunted her. Containment measures approved. She decided to copy the document, but the palace printer jammed, leaving a partial page. Before she could destroy it, footsteps echoed down the corridor. She hid the page inside a condolence card addressed to Diana's charity office. Moments later, 2 men from internal communications appeared, asking about a breach. Emily smiled politely and said nothing. When they left, she leaned against the door, heart racing. Somewhere in that envelope, mailed with innocent sympathy, the truth had just found its way out. A week later, Detective Devereaux met Peter Langley in a quiet Paris cafe near the Seine. She slid the envelope of photos across the table. He offered the audio file in return. Their eyes met. Strangers bound by forbidden knowledge. If we publish this, "They'll destroy us," Peter said. Martine lit a cigarette, her voice low. "They already are." Outside, a black car idled, engine purring. Neither noticed. As they spoke of light flashes, missing footage, and orders signed in silence, the world moved, as though nothing had changed. But it had. And the storm they were about to unleash would not be contained. The story broke before dawn. A grainy audio clip, uploaded anonymously, echoed across the digital world. Target entering tunnel. Within hours, the global press erupted. The kingdom's communications office denied its authenticity, yet the voice was unmistakably official. In a guarded apartment, former bodyguard Thomas Reeve watched the broadcast with trembling hands. The memories he'd fought to bury now marched back in full color. The flash, the second vehicle, the silence that followed. He had told them what he remembered, but the record had vanished. Now the truth was out, and so was his life. Detective Marianne Dufour and journalist Peter Langley met again, this time not as conspirators but fugitives of truth. The documents Emily had sent from the palace, the containment memo, matched the timeline of the crash perfectly. Every minute accounted for, every name redacted except one. "Reeve. They'll come for us," Marianne said, eyes scanning the street outside. Peter nodded, slipping the files into a hollowed-out book. "Then let them," he whispered, "because now the whole world's watching." Somewhere deep within the kingdom's intelligence archives, an alarm triggered. The truth had escaped containment. At the palace, chaos rippled through corridors of control. The sovereign remained composed, but her advisors whispered in crisis. "Public confidence is fracturing," said the Lord Chamberlain. "Let it fracture," she replied quietly. "But not the crown." The order was given to discredit all sources, bury the evidence, and, if needed, destroy reputations. Yet beneath that regal calm, guilt lingered, not for what was done, but for what had been allowed. The princess had been too human for the throne. And now, in death, she was more powerful than ever. Emily Westwood watched from afar as her letter, the one she'd hidden inside a condolence card, became the cornerstone of the leak. Her name was nowhere, her face unseen, but she knew it was only a matter of time. That evening, she packed a single suitcase and left her flat near Hyde Park. The radio spoke of inquiries, protests, demands for transparency. None of it mattered. She paused by a bridge and looked toward the palace skyline, its towers haloed by rain. "You can bury a person," she murmured, "but not a ghost." Then she disappeared into the city lights. The footage aired globally, a reconstruction of that final night. The car, the tunnel, the blinding flash. What had been dismissed as rumor now looked deliberate. Yet as quickly as it appeared, the footage vanished, deleted from networks, replaced by statements of technical error. Still, something had shifted. For the first time, the people no longer believed the crown's silence. In the same hospital where it began, Thomas Reeve stood by the window, breathing the free air, justice he knew would never come from courts or kings. But truth had already escaped, and truth, once freed, never returns quietly. The kingdom trembled beneath its own grandeur. Parliament convened in emergency session, demanding answers about the accidental death of Princess Alina. Across every network, anchors spoke the same forbidden words: cover-up, corruption, complicity. Inside the palace, corridors once echoing with order now buzzed with fear. The sovereign listened as her advisors argued, some urging transparency, others insisting survival required sacrifice. Meanwhile, far from those marble halls, Thomas Reeve read the headlines with quiet disbelief. What he'd carried alone for months was now a nation's reckoning. Truth, once buried, had become contagious. Detective Marianne Dufour was summoned before the inquiry board. 5 men in tailored suits, smiles sharp as razors. "State only what is proven," one demanded. She placed her files on the table, each page stamped, dated, undeniable. Then you'll need to redefine proven, she replied. The room fell silent. They had expected fear, not defiance. As she exited, a young clerk slipped her a folded note. They're erasing evidence tonight. She didn't look back. Instead, she reached for her phone, dialing Peter Langley's number. We go public, she said. Everything now. That night, the kingdom's networks were hijacked for exactly 6 minutes. A live broadcast flickered onto every screen. Marianne's voice, steady, measured, unflinching. She laid out timelines, documents, the memo titled Containment Protocol. Peter's footage followed, showing the second car entering the tunnel seconds before impact. The feed cut abruptly, replaced by a royal crest and stat. But 6 minutes were enough. In pubs, offices, classrooms, and palaces alike, people stopped and stared. For the first time, the silence broke. Not by decree, but by disbelief. The palace gates became both shrine and siege. Thousands gathered, holding candles instead of torches, chanting her name. Alina. Daina. Inside, Queen Eleanor stood before the window, listening to the chant that rolled like thunder across the capital. They want her justice, murmured the Lord Chamberlain. No, the Queen answered softly. They want the truth I denied them. Outside, the crowd grew louder. Power, she realized, was never truly held, only borrowed from belief, and belief, once broken, never returns whole. By dawn, the government fell into disarray. Ministers resigned, the inquiry reopened, and files once hidden under national security appeared online for the world to see. Thomas Reeve stood beside Marianne and Peter as the first international broadcast declared. Justice for the lost princess. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted, but he remained silent, eyes lifted toward the sunrise. You've done it, Peter whispered. No, Thomas said. She did. And as the bells of the city rang for the first time, not in mourning, but awakening, the kingdom of Albion entered a new era. One born, not of royalty, but revelation. Months passed since the truth had broken through the veil. The kingdom of Albion no longer whispered, it mourned aloud. Statues and tributes filled the city squares, yet the air felt unsettled, as if the walls themselves still listened for her voice. Thomas Reeve visited the rebuilt memorial beneath the old bridge, his reflection mingling with hers in the marble. He hadn't sought fame, only peace, yet peace eluded him still. She wasn't perfect, he murmured to the silence. She was real. Behind him, a child placed a white rose beside the plaque, and for the first time the weight on his chest eased. Detective Marianne Dufour stood before the International Tribunal, not as a witness but as a reminder. The judges thanked her for courage. She offered only silence. Truth, she knew, was not a trophy. It was a burden. After the hearing, she slipped away to a quiet cafe near the river. Peter joined her, eyes tired but alive. We did what we could, he said. Marianne smiled faintly. And that will have to be enough. Outside, the city hummed again. Freer, if not cleaner. Justice had not been perfect, but it had been undeniable. Inside the palace, silence reigned again. Not the silence of power, but of reckoning. Queen Eleanor walked alone through the portrait gallery. Each canvas stared back like judgment. For the largest, a painting of Alina in white. She paused. The brushstrokes captured youth, defiance, and something she had once mistaken for rebellion. Now she understood it was simply truth in its purest form. You won, the queen whispered. The words echoed softly against the marble, not bitter, but relieved. For even crowns, she thought, must one day bow to memory. Across Albion, schools began teaching her story, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. Her charities flourished again, her causes reborn under new names. The phrase, "be kind," even when seen, became etched across murals and songs. Thomas watched one such mural being painted in his neighborhood, Alina's face half in shadow, half in sunlight. He didn't intervene. History had found its balance, painting her not as saint nor scandal, but human. And that, at last, was freedom. Night returned to the city that had never truly slept. A candle flickered in a palace window, and on the bridge below, the memorial glowed softly under moonlight. The camera rose slowly, capturing the skyline, ancient, bruised, but alive. In voiceover, Peter's final words echoed across the darkness. "Truth does not destroy kingdoms. Silence does." The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of wind over stone, the last whisper of a woman who changed the world, not by power, but by her refusal to be forgotten.